One more, Fred Craddock, and this is the hardest one. Fred Craddock created the inductive method of preaching. So often preaching is deductive. We go through this process and we study commentaries and prayer and all stuff, and we have the aha moment during the week. And then we say, okay, the aha moment is, Jesus loves you and it's amazing. And so then when we get to Sunday, we say, the point of the sermon is Jesus loves you and it's amazing. And here are 3 ways that you know why Jesus loves you and it's amazing. And what Craddock says is that that's fine, but that's a kind of boring way of preaching. And he said, what preachers miss is that during the week, you had this aha moment that was pretty amazing. And what if you did it instead of a deductive way of explaining it, you took them on a journey, an inductive journey, so they could have their own aha moment. Tough thing is, Craddock was a master storyteller who could tell these stories that it would like make your head explode at the end. Most of us don't know how to do that, but it's a fun way of thinking about using storytelling as a way of preaching.
It's funny, being that you're in Georgia and I'm a disciples pastor, I was wondering how long it was going to be before I heard Fred Craddock. So
Father Craig, Father Craddock, Father Fred, you know about Fred Craddock. What a gift to preaching he was.
Yes, he was. Mm-hmm.
And to be such a small man with such a, as he says it, in the great orchestra of the church, he's just a piccolo, with this little whispery voice of his, and golly, he could just preach his brains out. Mm-hmm. Craddock said too that early, you probably know this, but he writes in his books that he found his father was a master storyteller too, and so Craddock really embodied that. But he found early in preaching, he would preach and he'd watch people fall asleep. And then what he found was when he got out there and he'd read everybody after church and do the whole, that he'd get to talking and storytelling. And he found that they were more engaged on the front steps of the church listening to him tell stories than they were when he was preaching. So Craddock was like, I think there's something to this. I need to bring this into the pulpit because they listen better. Yeah.
It's always kind of interesting because I always wonder if that's a Southern thing or if that's just preaching in general, because I noticed that there are a lot of pastors from the South that are really strong storytellers.
Storytelling is a Southern thing.
Yes.
And I'm not saying it's everybody story tells.
No.
It's like everybody can make fried chicken, but the fried chicken tastes different down here. There's something in the heat that makes fried chicken and the humidity taste better, and cornbread melt in your mouth, and it makes a story sound better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think, the other person that I think a lot about with storytelling is Will Willimon.
Oh, yes.
Who is very good at that.
South Carolina born, and Bishop Willimon, he can tell a story too.
Yes.
Willimon loves to, and Willimon's one of his big influences is Flannery O'Connor, the great Gothic, Southern Gothic short story writer. If you want what I think is one of the best sermons in short story form, go read Flannery O'Connor's story Revelation.
Okay.
With Ruby Turpin, the nasty little Southern judgmental woman, Ruby Turpin. And read Revelation, and when you get to the end, it's a sermon unto itself. And I've used the image at the end, but Flannery O'Connor is always this big ending that and that Willimon loves doing that. Flannery O'Connor is a good man is hard to find. The story where the woman, the robber kills her in the end. You know that story?
I've heard of it. Yes.
Yeah, so I was spoiler, she basically, all the judgmental stuff leaves and she has mercy for the first time in her life. And this guy had a gun pulled on her and he ended up killing her. And he said, she'd have been he said she'd be pretty amazed if somebody had pulled a gun on her entire life. And Flannery O'Connor said the grace of God should hit you between the eyes. And that's what Willimon loves doing.
Huh.
Yeah.
And this actually leads to your most recent blog post, because it was talking about preaching across generations.
Yeah.
Because there's something I remember hearing, it's not written down anywhere, but it was a Willimon story of a young pastor. This was during his time as the bishop in North Alabama, who was in North Alabama. And the young pastor comes to him and basically says that he's kind of shocked by the racism of the members of his congregation. And William was said to have responded, "Your pastor in North Alabama, what did you expect?" It's kind of that sense of kind of helping to school him or helping to understand this is the church that you're dealing with. It's not the kind of an idealized belief. And in some ways, it's kind of that imparting across of a generation. Usually it's a little bit more softer in that way, but obviously he had reason to kind of hit him with a 2x4.
Well, but when it's softer, it's harder. It's harder to deal with because it's a lot easier. Life would be a lot easier. Racism is a great example. It would be a lot easier to preach about racism in my church if my people were out burning crosses in front yards.
Mm-hmm.
What's hard about preaching about racism is when you're dealing with systemic racism, and when you're dealing with the difference between avoiding racism versus being anti-racist, which I believe is what we're called to be now. You can't just avoid, it's like John Wesley has these general rules of do no harm, do good, right? And then stay in love with God. We've been stuck on do no harm. As long as I don't say racist things and go around being a racist, then we're good. But the truth is we're not doing good. And doing good means adjusting and readjusting the systems in our own lives to say, not only am I going to avoid racism, I want to be anti-racist. That's hard for a lot of people to take.
So how do you get it across?
You try to assess where you are. You love people just like you love your children, when you have to give them a hard lesson. For example, one way that a friend taught me to talk about systemic racism is someone will inevitably say, "What do you mean white privilege? I've never had privilege in my life. I've worked for and everything's been hard and I've gone through and da 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 da." To which I'd say, yes, you have. You have had obstacles in your way. You have gone through many things and you have earned everything that you have. But one obstacle you have not had is the color of your skin. You've had a lot of other ones. And all we're saying here is the color of your skin has not been an obstacle. And then I like to remind people, and you, I'm sure, have gone through this. I'm a father. I have a son and a daughter. I have friends who are closer to your age and whose kids are a little bit older. My kids are 10 and 5. It weighs on me so heavily that I will not have to take my son and have the talk with him. And the talk is, how do we behave and respond when you get pulled over by a police officer? I have friends who dads have to talk, and what kills me is it's like this ritual, this passage of time now, that I talk to my son because my father had to talk to me and his father had to talk to him. And it's the same conversation. How do you interact with police and not get yourself arrested or killed? I don't have to have that conversation with my son. That's privilege. So now we have to ask ourselves the questions, and I'm not saying I don't come at my church people this hard, but like if I were having this conversation,
no.
Like, does that break your heart? Now let's talk about what could we do so that the next generation of fathers don't have to worry so much, and mothers don't have to worry so much that their black boys are not home on time. Like there's just something to it. In a similar way, there's other privileges. Like I don't have to talk to my son the way I'm gonna have to talk to my daughter of like, hey, when you go to a party, keep your hands on your drink at all times. Make sure you know where your exits are. Don't get cornered in a place that you don't know somebody around. Those are things that girls have to worry about that boys don't. So there's all these layers of privilege that if we just kind of peel it back like an onion, people know it's true and they need to take that shock a little bit and be bothered by it. And then when we can get bothered by it, we can start to really talk about